Detroit has a massive problem, and it's floating in the middle of the ocean. While US automakers battle supply chain costs, China's BYD just did something completely unheard of. They bypassed the global shipping industry and built their own naval fleet. Meet the BYD Explorer number 1, just one of 8 massive cargo ships BYD deployed in under 2 years. Each of these floating behemoths can carry up to 9,200 vehicles at a time. That gives BYD the power to export over 1 million cars a year, completely immune to skyrocketing global freight rates. They aren't just building the batteries and the cars in-house anymore, they own the delivery network. By controlling every step from the factory floor to the international port, BYD is crushing the price of their EVs in a way traditional automakers simply can't match. Ford and GM aren't just losing a price war. They're losing a logistics war they didn't even know they were fighting. So here's exactly how BYD built the ultimate supply chain checkmate and what it means for the future of cars. Let's rewind to 2022. Elon Musk stood in front of investors and admitted something that shocked the entire auto industry. Tesla was struggling to sell more cars, not because people weren't buying, but because there weren't enough ships to carry them. Musk said it plainly. There aren't enough ships, not enough trains, not enough car transport trucks. Tesla had built the cars. It just couldn't get them to the people who wanted to buy them. That single sentence exposed a hidden crack in the entire global auto industry. Every automaker on Earth, from Ford to Volkswagen to Toyota, relies on the same shrinking pool of ocean freighters to move cars across the planet. These specialized ships are called PCTCs, short for pure car and truck carriers, and there simply aren't enough of them. Freight rates for these vessels have exploded by more than 10 times since 2020. Automakers are now paying a fortune just to rent space on someone else's boat, and even then, they have to wait in line behind everyone else doing the exact same thing. To understand how bad this got, you have to understand what these ships actually are. A PCTC isn't a container ship. It's a purpose-built vessel with multiple decks designed specifically to roll cars on and roll cars off, which is where the term ro-ro comes from. There are only a limited number of shipyards in the entire world capable of building them. And after the 2008 financial crisis, most shipping companies stopped ordering new ones. Demand for these ships collapsed for years, so almost nobody built more. Then, seemingly overnight, the entire planet started buying electric vehicles, and suddenly there weren't nearly enough car carriers left to move them all. That mismatch created a bidding war. Automakers all over the world were suddenly fighting over the same small pool of available ships, and shipping companies knew it. Charter rates for these vessels didn't just go up, they exploded, climbing to more than 10 times what they cost just a few years earlier. For a company like Ford or Volkswagen, that meant every single vehicle shipped overseas came with a massive, unpredictable cost bolted on top of it. A cost that had absolutely nothing to do with how good the car actually was. Most companies looked at that problem and just accepted it as the cost of doing business. BYD looked at it and saw an opportunity. While Tesla was begging for boat space and Ford was quietly eating rising freight costs, BYD made a decision that nobody in the auto industry saw coming. They decided to stop renting ships and start owning them. In January of 2024, the BYD Explorer number 1 set sail from Yantai, China. It wasn't just another cargo ship, it was the first car carrier ever built by a Chinese shipyard specifically to export Chinese-made vehicles. The ship stretches 200 meters long, rises 13 decks high, and can hold 7,000 vehicles in a single voyage. It runs on a dual fuel system, burning liquefied natural gas alongside traditional fuel, cutting emissions while cutting costs. On its maiden voyage, it carried a full load of BYD vehicles all the way to Europe, a 41-day journey across 2 oceans. That was just the beginning. Over the next 24 months, BYD didn't stop at one ship. They built 7 more: the Changzhou, the Hefei, the Zhengzhou, the Shenzhen, the Xi'an, the Changsha, and finally, the Jinan. Each one bigger than the last. The newest vessels, like the Shenzhen and the Xi'an, can each carry more than 9,000 vehicles in a single crossing, making them some of the largest car carriers ever built. Picture a floating parking garage the length of 2 football fields, packed wall to wall with electric vehicles, cutting across the Pacific or the Atlantic completely independent of any outside shipping company. 8 ships, built in under 2 years. That is not a normal corporate decision. That is a company rewriting the rules of an entire industry. To put that timeline in perspective, most shipping companies take years just to design and finance a single vessel like this, let alone build and launch 8 of them back to back. BYD partnered with Chinese shipbuilders, including CIMC Raffles, and simply treated ship construction the same way it treats car manufacturing, as something to be scaled aggressively and repeated fast. Some of the vessels were leased through international shipping partners in the early stages, but BYD has steadily moved toward owning its carriers outright, which means every dollar spent shipping a car isn't going to an outside company anymore. It's staying inside BYD. And these aren't just bigger versions of ordinary cargo ships. They're floating showcases of BYD's own technology. Several of the vessels use BYD's energy storage systems and shaft generator technology on board, the same battery expertise the company uses in its cars, now helping power the ships that carry those cars across the ocean. It's the same story playing out at a completely different scale. Take a piece of the supply chain that used to belong to someone else and build the in-house version instead. And here's the part that should really make Detroit nervous. This shipping fleet isn't a side project or a marketing stunt. It's the final piece of something BYD has been building for over a decade: total vertical integration. Most car companies buy their batteries from someone else. BYD makes its own. Most car companies buy their semiconductor chips from outside suppliers, especially during the chip shortages of the last few years. BYD makes its own. Most car companies rely on outside partners to mine and refine the raw materials that go into an EV battery. BYD has pushed into lithium mining and refining too. Now, with this fleet of 8 ships, BYD controls the very last mile. The one thing every other automaker on the planet still has to pay someone else for: getting the finished car from the factory to the customer's country. Think about what that actually means. When Ford builds an electric truck in Michigan and wants to sell it overseas, it has to negotiate freight contracts, compete for limited ship space, and absorb whatever price the shipping market decides to charge that month. When BYD builds a car in Shenzhen and wants to sell it in Germany or Brazil or Australia, it just loads it onto a ship it already owns, with a captain it already employs, on a schedule it controls completely. There's no middleman taking a cut. There's no waiting list. There's no getting held hostage by shipping companies during a freight rate spike. Go back even further in the process, and the pattern only gets more extreme. BYD's name literally stands for Build Your Dreams. But inside the company, there's an unofficial motto that fits even better: build it yourself. This is a company that makes its own blade batteries in-house rather than buying cells from an outside battery supplier the way most automakers do. It designs and manufactures its own semiconductor chips, which is a huge part of why BYD barely felt the global chip shortage that crippled production lines at Ford, GM, and nearly every other automaker a few years back. It has pushed into lithium mining and refining operations to help secure the raw materials that go into every battery it builds. It even makes many of its own seats, dashboards, and electronics, rather than outsourcing them to third-party parts suppliers. Every one of those decisions follows the exact same logic as the ships. Find a piece of the process that's normally outsourced, expensive, and unpredictable, and bring it in-house where it can be controlled and scaled. The shipping fleet isn't a strange, one-off side project. It's the natural final step of a strategy BYD has been executing for over a decade. That is a structural cost advantage that traditional automakers simply cannot copy overnight, because you can't build 8 ocean-going cargo ships in a weekend. BYD started planning this fleet back in 2022, right around the same time Musk was complaining about not having enough boats. While competitors reacted to the shipping crisis,
BYD had already decided to make sure it would never have to deal with that crisis at all, and the results are already showing up in the numbers. Before we go further, if this kind of story interests you, the way global companies are quietly rewriting entire industries while nobody's watching, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we break down stories like this every single week, the kind of moves that don't make the front page today, but end up defining the next decade. All right, let's get back into it.
In 2025, BYD officially became the world's largest electric vehicle maker, selling over 2.2 million battery electric vehicles in a single year. But the real story isn't what happened inside China. It's what happened outside of it. BYD's overseas sales crossed the 1 million vehicle mark for the first time ever in 2025, more than double what they exported just 1 year earlier. And that growth didn't slow down. Heading into 2026, BYD set a new monthly export record, shipping well over 170,000 vehicles overseas in a single month. Now, BYD isn't just hoping to keep that momentum going. They're targeting 1.5 million vehicle exports for the full year of 2026. That's not a modest goal. That's a company betting its entire growth strategy on the world outside of China, and betting that its private fleet of ships gives it an advantage no competitor can match. And it's working. BYD has already taken the #1 spot for new energy vehicle sales in countries like Brazil, Turkey, Spain, Italy, Hungary, and Croatia. In the United Kingdom, BYD's sales exploded by nearly 600% in a single year, overtaking automotive brands that have existed in Britain for generations. These aren't fringe markets. These are established competitive car markets where BYD is landing plane loads, or in this case, shiploads, of vehicles and simply outpricing the local competition. Look closer at a market like Brazil, and you can watch the fleet strategy play out in real time. The BYD Explorer #1 has docked at Brazil's Portocelo terminal again and again, sometimes just 4 months apart, unloading thousands of vehicles each visit. BYD's monthly sales in Brazil have more than doubled year over year, and the company is now building its own manufacturing plant there too, so eventually some of those cars won't even need to cross an ocean at all. First, you flood a market using your own ships. Then you build a factory inside that market once demand is proven. It's a playbook BYD is now running simultaneously across multiple continents at once, something almost no other automaker in history has attempted at this speed. Meanwhile, look at what's happening back in Detroit. Ford's electric vehicle division, called Model E, lost $4.8 billion in 2025 alone. That's on top of the $5.1 billion it lost the year before that. Since Ford launched the division, the total losses have surpassed $16 billion. $16 billion. And Ford still says it doesn't expect to break even until 2029. In late 2025, Ford quietly discontinued the electric F-150 Lightning, one of its flagship EV projects, and took a massive write-down of over $10 billion on cancelled electric vehicle programs. General Motors has faced its own version of this same story, scaling back EV production targets, delaying new electric models, and restructuring its electric strategy again and again as it tries to find a version of the math that actually works. Here's the uncomfortable truth neither company wants to say out loud. Part of this isn't just about batteries or chip shortages or consumer demand. Part of it is structural. Ford and GM are still playing by the old rules of the auto industry, where you build the car and then you pay someone else, at whatever price they decide to charge, to get it to the customer. BYD looked at that entire system and simply opted out of it. When your competitor owns the ships, the ports, the batteries, and the chips, and you're still renting cargo space from a third-party company at record high prices, you're not just behind on manufacturing. You're behind on infrastructure. And infrastructure gaps like that don't close in a single product cycle. They take years, sometimes decades, to fix. It's also worth remembering that Ford's losses aren't happening in a vacuum. Ford's own leadership has pointed to tariff costs, softer domestic EV demand, and rising input prices as major factors squeezing the Model E division. On top of the billions already spent developing vehicles like the F-150 Lightning before ultimately pulling back on it. General Motors has walked a similar path, repeatedly adjusting its EV production targets and pushing back timelines as it tries to find a version of the electric business that actually turns a profit. None of this means Ford and GM are poorly run companies. It means they're fighting a two-front war, trying to make electric vehicles profitable in a tough domestic market while simultaneously competing overseas against a rival that solved its logistics problem years ago. Now, it's worth mentioning that governments haven't just stood by and watched this happen. The United States has placed steep tariffs on Chinese-made electric vehicles, and the European Union has done the same, specifically trying to slow down exactly the kind of pricing advantage BYD's fleet creates. In some ways, that's a direct admission of just how serious a threat this is. You don't slap emergency tariffs on a competitor that isn't winning. But tariffs also reveal the limits of that strategy. BYD has responded by building local factories in places like Brazil, Hungary, and Turkey, assembling vehicles closer to the customer to soften the impact of import duties, all while still using its own fleet to move parts, components, and finished vehicles between its global manufacturing sites. Even when the destination changes, the underlying advantage owning the logistics doesn't go away. This is why so many industry analysts are now saying the real EV war was never actually about who builds the best-looking car, or who has the longest range or the fastest charging time. Those things matter, but they're not what wins a global price war. What wins a global price war is who can build a car for the least amount of money and get it into the most customers' hands the fastest. And right now, BYD has built a machine that does exactly that. From the lithium in the ground, to the battery in the car, to the ship that carries it across the ocean. So, what does this actually mean for the future of the auto industry? First, expect prices to keep falling, especially outside the United States. BYD's per-vehicle shipping costs are dramatically lower than companies still relying on chartered freighters, and that savings gets passed directly into more aggressive pricing in markets like Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Traditional automakers competing in those same markets are going to feel that pressure every single quarter. Second, expect other Chinese automakers to try copying this playbook. BYD didn't just solve a shipping problem for itself. It proved that a car company can vertically integrate all the way down to global logistics and come out ahead. Companies like Chery and SAIC are already expanding their own export fleets, watching closely as BYD writes the blueprint in real time. Third, and maybe most importantly, expect Western automakers to face a genuine strategic decision. Do they try to build their own shipping capacity, a massive and expensive undertaking that would take years to pay off? Do they keep leaning on traditional freight partners and simply accept a permanent cost disadvantage? Or do they pull back from certain international markets entirely and focus on defending home turf, the way Ford has already started doing by scaling back its EV ambitions and leaning harder into trucks and hybrids? None of those options are easy. And that's exactly the position BYD wanted to put its competitors in. There's also a talent and expertise gap that doesn't show up in any spreadsheet. Running a global shipping operation isn't just about owning vessels. It means managing port logistics, marine fuel contracts, international maritime regulations, and crew operations across multiple continents. That's an entirely different skill set from building cars, and BYD has now spent years quietly building that expertise in-house. A traditional automaker deciding tomorrow to compete on the same terms wouldn't just need to write a check for new ships. It would need to build an entire logistics division from scratch, competing for the same limited shipyard capacity that made this problem so expensive in the first place. What makes this story so remarkable isn't just the size of the ships or the number of cars they can carry, it's the mindset behind the decision. While most companies were treating the global shipping crisis as an unavoidable cost of doing business, one company looked at the exact same problem and asked a completely different question. What if we just didn't have that problem at all? What if we owned the entire chain, from the mine to the factory to the port to the customer's driveway? That single question, and the willingness to spend billions of dollars answering it, is why BYD now controls a private fleet capable of moving over 1 million cars a year, immune to freight rate spikes, immune to shipping delays, and largely immune to the very supply chain crisis that's currently squeezing every other automaker on the planet. Detroit built cars for over a century by mastering the assembly line. BYD just proved that in the modern global economy, mastering the ocean might matter just as much. If you found this breakdown valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow and lets more people find videos like this one. And if you want to go deeper on how China's EV industry is quietly reshaping global manufacturing, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Drop a comment below and let me know, do you think Ford and GM can still catch up? Or has this race already been decided? I read every single comment, so let's talk about it down there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.